right?
Sorry?
Jana, you were talking to Eva, not to me.
Oh yeah, I was looking to you, Rahel, actually, because I don't really see where the, because you know, when I see your screen on your computer, I know where the video is, but I can't really see the PowerPoint presentation.
You can't see because it's in the back. I put it down there as well.
Oh, okay.
It's right next to it now.
Yeah, but when we present, like when you are presenting, we need to have it on. What do you call it? Like we have, yeah. You have
Okay,
to show it, right, Rachel?
Of course, yeah, we will. I can even open it now.
And on the maybe
that means you won't be able to use Skype, sorry.
Yeah, but on the other computer you can use Skype if needed.
Ah, on the other computer. Ah, right.
Right?
Yeah. Yes. Now we found a good solution.
So if you have the presentation ready, and then you just change, you can give me back my. Well, actually, maybe I can even take it back. Ah.
You should be able to take it back.
Are you sure? Yes. Okay, so I'm the presenter. I'm just putting this, and I'm gonna start. Shall we do it?
Okay. Let's do it.
Are you ready?
Yes, I'm gonna mute myself.
Me too for the time being.
Okay.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eva Witkova. I'm the project coordinator of 100 Years Young AFS Youth Workshop and Symposium. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from New York. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the first webinar of the project and the first webinar of the third module of our virtual activities. We'll spend about 1 hour together, and the workshop or the webinar will be led by two of the project facilitators, which is Jana Holla, who is going to be the lead facilitator today, and Rahel Ashwanden from Switzerland, who is going to be a support facilitator today. My role is the host, and also I'm going to give support if anybody needs that, and I will also record this webinar. So let's jump in right away, and I will pass on to Rahel right now.
All right. I'm sorry, the small technical problem on my side, but it's all solved now. So it's very clear that the answer to this question is, oh wow, the numbers are going still up. AFS, the anti-fooling system. 75% are telling us this is the topic for today. I hope I'm giving over the word to Jana, and I hope, Jana, you're ready to talk about the anti-fooling system.
Yes, hello Rahel, and hello everybody else. I'm just going to put on my screen for a minute so you can see who you're talking to. And hi, and hopefully you can see me. So I'm Yana, I'm greeting you everybody from Cairo, where the streets are quiet at the moment, but that might not be the case for the whole seminar, webinar, so we'll see how that goes. And yes, we're actually still waiting for a few more minutes until everybody joins us. Usually we like to give people 5 to 10 minutes. So let's take another 3 minutes and then we'll actually start the webinar itself. So if everybody has voted on the poll, just keep it up open for a moment. We'll actually enlighten you on the answers very shortly. And probably you can already hear the prayer that goes on in the background. Apologies for that. Well, I can actually mute myself for the time being. All right, looks like we already have 17 attendees, so I guess we can actually begin. Rahel, so basically at the, when you closed the poll, you said that it was basically the third answer, the anti-fouling system that people were hoping they're going to be hearing about today. Am I correct?
Yes, we're definitely talking about the anti-fouling system. We're up to 83% actually telling us this is the topic they want to hear about. So I give this over to you and you have to go with it. Okay, all right, great.
So I'm going to be disappointing you a bit because actually we're not going to be talking about the anti-fouling system. The poll that we created was basically a little fun beginning. We wanted to start on a lighter note, since the seminar shouldn't be really all that serious eventually, because hopefully we're going to be having a bit of fun here as well, but we still want it to be informative. So you learned one thing, what AFS can stand for. Of course, our acronym of AFS is a bit different. It's the American Field Service, and today we'll actually, among the topics we'll be talking about, we'll be also figuring out why do we call it the American Field Service for those of you who are not actually AFSers and who are not really that familiar with our history. But let us start. So the topic today is actually, it's in our DNA, AFS, intercultural learning, and global citizenship. Yeah, so there was the AFS part of the answer, so you got that correctly, that's for sure. Okay, we already introduced ourselves a bit, or at least I said a few words about myself, living in Cairo, leading this webinar. Rahel, would you like to also say a few words about yourself, since we'll be hearing from you as well?
Sorry, I just quickly had to get back onto this. So I'm very happy to be here helping you on the support level. Basically, I'm going to be launching all the fun polls that we have prepared and asking you all the different questions because we really want you to be part of this webinar. My name is Rahel Ashwanden. I have been an AFS volunteer for, I guess, about 10 years now, mainly as a trainer, and I'm especially interested in the area of global education or global citizen education. And I'm looking forward to this webinar.
All right, thanks a lot, Rahel. So in that sense, how about we hear also from you people? Because of course, what's happening right now, you may have noticed that our organizers, that means Eva, are muting you so that we don't have too many distractions on the line. And at this moment, we will not ask you personally for your introductions, since I can see attendees are still arriving. But we'll have another poll that Rahel, our poll fairy, will put up in about a few seconds. So please take the time to answer that poll, and then we'll share the results and we'll kind of conclude the introduction part of this webinar. So Rahel, can I ask you for the next poll? Thank you very much. Here it comes.
Let's see. Numbers are going up very fast. Ooh. Cannot tell you anything yet. We're looking for somebody in Australia still. Anybody in Africa? Please join now. No, doesn't look like it. We have still some changes. Okay, final numbers seem to have arrived. Thank you all for participating. We have 18% people are joining us from Asia today. 47% are sitting somewhere in Europe, and 35% are in South or North America. So actually, Jana, you did not participate. I can see that in my poll here.
Yes, unfortunately, being one of the panelists or being part of the staff on this webinar, we actually cannot vote. But yes, there's definitely one person from Africa, and that would be me.
Great. Just to help our numbers, that's wonderful.
Wonderful.
All right, I'm going to close the poll. I think everybody has voted. Wonderful. Great.
Okay. Another question that we had for you would be whether you already participated in a webinar. And why we're asking these questions is because we'll have a very few second note coming up in terms of the technicalities of being a participant in the webinar. So I'm actually going to ask you to try out a new feature, or one of the features that you as attendees have at your disposal to communicate with us organizers, and that is raising your hand. So please, for those for whom this is the first webinar ever that they participate at, can you raise your hand?
All right, I just started the poll.
We do actually have a poll on that too. Mm-hmm.
But you can also raise your hands. Let's try that one. Just so we have tried both possibilities. Yes, I see first people with their hand, more people. So 4 people, 5, 6. All of you who are raising your hands have already participated in the webinar. Is that correct?
It should be the other way around. People who have not participated in a webinar yet.
Oh, sorry for turning that around, Jana.
No worries.
But there is other people who were confused because they just withdrew their hands, so that's wonderful. We have 7 people for whom this is the first webinar. Wonderful. Okay. Thanks for raising your hands. It's working perfectly as well. And that's pretty much also what people say on the poll we had before that. So that seems to be the answer. Thank you very much. I'm closing this poll as well.
And I think we have one last question for them, right, Meryl?
Yes. Let's move on to the last question. I think we do the poll because then there is no confusion on which answers which one. The last question is, have you ever used this platform that we're using today, which is the GoToWebinar? Oh, it's a 50-50 no, not anymore. Still some people have not yet answered. Okay, we have nearly 80% people who are on GoToWebinar for the first time. So I think, okay, Jana, you should take some time explaining the rules of this webinar.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Thanks a lot, Rahel, and thank you everybody for participating. So as you can see, what we're already trying in practice is the fact how can you actually communicate with us, and we have several ways how we can make this more interactive, and we'll be using them throughout this 1 hour that we're together. So first of all, as you can see, there's the polls, which when they want to ask you all a question, we put up a poll and then we share the results. So this is one way how you can be active, and thank you very much, Rahel. Here we can see it. See the results. The other way, what we already tried with all of you eventually, would be the raising the hand. So if you have a question, if you would like to say something, raise your hand and Rahel will unmute you, and then that's when you can basically speak. Yeah. Another way how you can approach us, if you don't want to be distracting the whole webinar, so to say, would be through a chat function, which is basically a little box that you have below. That chat function actually, I think I'm correct here when I say that it's the same thing as if you ask us a question. So the question actually goes to the organizers, and unfortunately the rest of you cannot see it. Whenever there's a question which is relevant, Rahel will alert me to that fact, because just like you, I also have a bit of a limited view. Being the panelist, my limitation is that I actually cannot see when you raise your hands. So Rahel, besides being our poll fairy, as I'm calling her from now on, is also my eyes. Yeah. So whenever there's a raised hand, that's why I always ask her. It's not that I'm blind. I just really, unfortunately, don't have that option on my screen to see that. So when we move on to the next slide, we'll have a few more technicalities that we would like you to observe. Just like every face-to-face interaction or basically any event, also we have a couple of rules of engagement that we would like to introduce to you. And if you actually have a problem with any of these, or you would like to give us some few more ones, of course you can use the chat/question function and just basically add your contribution. But some of the kind of, I would say by now, more universally observed rules would be your phones. It would be great if you put them on silent or switch them off and put them preferably a bit away from your computer, because otherwise there can be a bit of a distraction in the wavelength or whatever it is that internet and everything else works by these days. We already explained the chat function. Yeah, so if you have a question, please ask in the chat. Or if you actually want to talk to us personally or to everybody else in the webinar, of course, please raise your hand. And we would also like you to stay focused, have the slides on full screen, and preferably avoid multitasking. Now, of course, we all know that supposedly, generally speaking, women should be good multitaskers, and we can do a few things at a time. Some men, of course, as well. I wouldn't want to keep you away from this. However, we actually have a way of knowing if you're not basically focusing on what's happening on the screen right now. I know it's a bit spooky, but that's basically what the new technology is about, right? So we would really like you to be focused as much as you can. If you are feeling that this webinar isn't going your way, or you're actually a bit bored, please raise your hand, give us a chat notification so that we actually can see what's going on for you, yeah, on the other side of this virtual abode we're using right now. Anything I'm forgetting? I hope not. Yeah, so let me just move on. I'm going to talk very briefly about what happened during the last two modules. So as you know, we're basically, oh, sorry, that's not where I wanted to be. One back. Okay, great. So in this 100 years young AFS virtual journey, or adventure as I like to call it, so far we've been together for already a month, and we still have 2 weeks off. In a month and a week, we still have 1 more week to go before we have a week off, and then some of us are meeting in Paris. But during this virtual journey, there have been already 2 modules that you have been interacting highly in. First one was the me as a global citizen, and there was the task when you were asked to come up with your own definition of what is a global citizen, how do you see that, and of course you had the possibility to chat during in your action groups and also at large about your ideas, and there's been a lot of great input there. And the other part was the module 2, which was connecting with the world around me. We were basically, or you were actually creating videos and connecting with other people and getting their idea what is a global citizen. So what we've done in order to basically incorporate these 2 previous modules into the 3rd module, which is Learning Together, that's the name, we actually we put basically all your definitions together, we put them in Wordle, and what came up is actually this lovely picture that Rahel prepared for us yesterday. So these are your answers. As you can see, it's not one clear definition, but we live in the 21st century, so I guess nobody can expect the one ultimate truth anymore. However, I would just like you to take a second, look at this. You probably have been while I was talking. And in today's webinar, there are a few aspects of this wonderful global citizenship puzzle that we have in front of us, which I would like to look into. And so I'm going to turn on to the next slide here. And so this is the journey that we're proposing for today's webinar. In the next more or less 40 to 45 minutes we still have together. We decided to take a bit of an action approach because, you know, the discussions that we've been having on LoRa so far have been more or less pretty much on the abstract level of what do we think, what are our ideas, kind of sharing the different viewpoints that there are. So we decided in this webinar, let's take a bit of a more practical approach, and let's take AFS as the hosting organization of this symposium and this virtual journey, and basically look at AFS as an example of global citizenship, as an organization, institution, working with a lot of people, trying to bring about a change in the world that affects us all. And we're going to look at it in more or less 3 different steps. The first one is being a global citizen basically means that you have, that basically you're ascribing to a certain identity. The identity of a global citizen. Of course, we have multiple identities, such as being a family member, either going to school or working. I mean, I guess I don't have to go into all of that. But basically, in this particular case, we'll be looking at AFS and also a bit of its history to kind of get a bit of a sense of what AFS is, who AFSers are in that sense. Every community has certain norms, certain values, certain rules and behaviors. So in the next step, we're going to be looking very briefly at what is the AFS's mission and vision, which for many of you would be already many of you are already familiar with it, but we're just creating the common platform and common ground. And the first step will be what I've been noticing a lot in the different lawyer discussions that you guys have been having, and also reading different literature on global citizenship. One thing that stands out in this particular group of people is this responsibility to act idea. So we don't want to be just passive members of a certain group called global citizens, but we're very often very active about it. And in order to represent AFS as a global citizenship institution, what we're going to be looking at is the intercultural learning in action, which is one of the main parts of the AFS's vision in a sense, and what they're actually doing. Okay, so this is basically what we're doing today. And I'm sorry, I'm having a little difficulties trying to get to the next slide here. Bear with me. Okay, so we're going to take a little trip down the memory lane, as we say sometimes. And Rahel has one more poll for you guys in terms of learning about what do you already know about the AFS history. So Rahel, may I ask you for the last poll? Okay, so here we have the first question. Why do we hold the centennial celebrations in Paris this year?
Okay, it's looking good, it's looking good. I'm going to tell you the truth here. I actually found out about the answer to this question myself this week when we were preparing. So I see that actually the group knows more than me.
Oh,
we have 90% correct answer. And now I have to give it a moment. Okay, sharing the results. So the right answer is actually answer C.
Yes.
Right, Diana? Maybe you can tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's where one of the founders of AFS actually sailed. Those days people were sailing, we're talking World War I, so we're talking 1914 starting at the time. Piat Andrew actually sailed to Paris to become one of the first volunteers in the war, and he was basically he established the AFS, or at the time AAFS, so American Ambulance Field Service, which operated in France throughout the First World War. And I'll tell you a bit more in the next slide. However, for now, this is the correct answer. However, also, the people who voted with 13% have a bit of a truth in there too, since what we'll also be looking at is the fact that it was actually the French students who, after First World War, came to the U.S. and kind of established the first exchange, although it wasn't really the official student exchanges as we understand them in today's understanding of what AFS is. So, great answers. Thanks a lot. Shall we go to the next question? So, where did the first student exchanges take place?
All right. At the beginning, it looked like everybody was going for the same answer, but I guess the people who entered the answers first were very sure about what they were saying. We give it one more second. So here we go. 79% are saying it's 1947, Jana. Is that correct?
That is actually correct. Yeah, I just realized that I might have confused some people telling them that, already after the First World War we have a couple of exchanges. But yeah, this question was mainly for what we call the AFS student exchanges. So we're talking mainly high school exchanges, and those actually started in 1947. That's when the first group entered. First group from Europe, from 10 countries in Europe, entered the U.S. and stayed for a year. Great, wonderful.
We have a very clever group here.
Absolutely.
I'm realizing that now.
And I believe we also have one last question.
Okay, one more question about the past of AFS. Jana?
Yeah.
All right. I don't think we wanted to ask an open question here, so I cannot actually raise the poll. So you're going to have to actually tell the question right out. I'm sorry. That's why we had a bit of silence here.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks for letting me know, Rahel. So the final question here would be, what was so special about the AFS ambulances? Anybody who knows a bit of the history, what do you think, what was so special about the AFS ambulances? And for this one, we would like you to use the chat function. Yeah. So if you have an answer, or you think you have an answer, if you have a guess, please just enter it very briefly into the chat, and Rahel will be.
Exactly. I just sent out the question also in a written form right now, so you can also read up on it. And I'm looking forward to reading your answers. I don't have any answers just yet, but I guess you're all writing. What was special about the AFS ambulance at the time? Okay, I have first answers. They transported wounded from both fighting sides. They were voluntary, said somebody else. Also somebody is saying because they picked up soldiers from both sides. We had that twice. Exactly, they would rescue people regardless of their side of the war. Driven by volunteers. So we have two main points that I'm reading here, Jana. One is the volunteering side, and the other one is that really they did not make any difference between which side the wounded were on. There's another answer here, which is that they carried the wounded from the front to the hinterland in France. So that's also very interesting.
We'll get to that actually, yeah, because there's a lot of different stories in terms of where exactly did the volunteers carry the wounded from? Was it directly from the field? Was it actually in the background of the field of the battlefield? So we'll get to that shortly. I mean, you're basically hitting the nail on the head, although you're 2 slides before me, so to say, which is always a bit of the danger of trying to come up with a question and then hope that people give you the answer you want. But the answer I was kind of aiming for at that very moment, sorry, I'm doing something wrong again, was actually the ambulances themselves. And one of the when we're looking at the AFS history, one of the things I want to be doing is I want to look at it from the perspective of global citizenship. Yeah? So I'll be kind of jumping into this history part and kind of giving you a bit of certain insights that I found very interesting when I was researching the history of AFS. So they were in a sense change makers, and as we all know, this is one of the main features that we have in terms of when we talk about global citizens. Yeah? What was different about their ambulances? First of all, of course, this was one of the first wars where actually we had vehicles instead of horse-drawn carriages. This is, of course, not something that AFS came up with, but of course they embraced it very quickly because it was one way how you can deliver the wounded and the casualties from the field, from the battlefields much faster. The other thing is that they actually realized that they needed ambulances that were fast and that were also light, because they needed to get as close to the battlefield as possible. So what they did is actually they approached Ford, who had a factory actually in France at the time already, and they asked him to create a special ambulance for them. So basically what he did, he created the platform, so basically the motor and the platform for the ambulance, and then they designed these wooden carriages that you can see on the top picture. The bottom one is mainly just for a bit of fun to see what an ambulance looked like and some of the cartoons that AFSers came up with at the time. So in a sense, we're talking about a bit of an innovation. So AFS was the, of course, they were not the only ambulance drivers in the First World War and in France as well. I mean, French army had also their ambulance drivers. However, the AFS force came up, as we said, with a bit of an innovative idea about what an ambulance looks like, and all the ambulances were standardized. They could carry, originally, they were built for either 4 patients to be transported in lying position or 5 patients sitting up. However, the reality was more closer to 8 people transported at a time. Okay, so just keep in mind the word change makers or innovators for this particular one. And talking about the war years in a sense, why AFS came to be, we've been already hitting the nail on the head here for a while. So I'm just going to basically summarize a few points here. First of all, it was mainly Piat Endry who was the founder of AFS and who actually in 1914 sailed to France. That's why we're also having the centennial celebrations here, because it's 100 years since the inception of the idea. And between 1914 and 1915, AFS actually functioned, as I already mentioned, as AAFS. So there was also the ambulance in the acronym. As of 1917, they were actually incorporated into the U.S. Army when they arrived after the United States joined the war. And from that moment on, the acronym changes to what we know and what we're familiar with, which is AFS, American Field Service. During World War I, American Field Service, so the American volunteers who came and volunteered in France, actually they were also at the beginning incorporated into the French Army originally. And although they volunteered, they did get a bit of a pay, but still, it was the volunteer effort because nobody drafted them into the army. That's when we talk about the volunteering here, just to go back to some of the answers that we saw in the chat. So in World War I, it was actually 2,500 volunteers who came from the U.S. And operated in France and in the French battlefields. And basically they carried supplies, because as of 1917 they also carried supplies. So they were not just ambulance drivers, but also drivers of lorries, and they were basically driving supplies around as well. So that's why AFS, not AAFS anymore. And they managed to actually carry more than 500 wounded. From what Nicole, the archivist at AFS Foundation tells me, the AFSers were not really directly involved in picking the wounded from the battlefields directly. However, the wounded were brought to the edge of the field into the first kind of stations, and that's where the ambulances were waiting. That's where the AFSer ambulances would pick up the wounded and the casualties and bring them to the hospitals. And it was mainly from the Second World War actually that both sides of the victims or basically of the soldiers were picked up. So not so much in the first one in France. However, this idea of it doesn't really matter who is our soldier and who is the enemy soldier. They're all human beings and we all need to help them. Was mainly more evident in the Second World War, and we'll get to that in a minute. So when the First World War finished, of course, the ambulance drivers went back home and the truck drivers went back home, and they had a reunion in the 1920s in New York City, where the AFS Association was more or less established. At the time, they already started, as I mentioned to you earlier, with the first kind of exchange program, but at the time they were mainly on the funding side. So they funded and supported French students who were coming to the U.S. to study at university level. So we're talking university students. And those exchanges actually lasted all the way until 1952, as you can see, and 222, nice number, of students were basically held by AFS to come to U.S. and study. When the Second World War started, the volunteers were called back. This time it was by Stefan Galati, who was kind of the right hand of Piat Endry. Actually, the first picture on the very top, you can see both of them, Piat, who is on the left, and Galati, who is on the right, standing in front of the AFS ambulances in the headquarters in Paris. Yeah, so the picture is from 1917. The second picture basically shows us the first reunion of AFS volunteers in 1920. And then the last picture is actually a picture from the Second World War. And here we can see that the volunteers didn't only go to France, But they also served in North Africa and the Middle East. They also served in Italy, towards the end of the war, also in Germany, and in India and Burma. This time they carried about 700,000 casualties, and this time it's from both sides of the war. Yeah, and that was also one of the
We have a question which I find very interesting before you move on to the next slide, which is from one of our participants asking if there was any collaboration between AFS and the Red Cross during the World War. I guess one of them.
I don't have a direct answer to that because I wasn't looking into that. However, there was definitely, I would imagine there must have been some cooperation going on since Red Cross was also one of the volunteer organizations, and they were actually the first ones to enter the war effort, as far as I know. But I'll come back. I'll ask Nicole, and I'll come back to you, okay, with the proper answer. I don't want to be guessing. But thanks. It's a great question. Okay, so I'll just go on here then. Unless, are there any more questions? Because I have a question for you.
We have no question from the participant side, so you can go shoot with yours.
Okay, great. This is the question I had for you, but you actually already answered that one. And you answered it in the first open question we had about the ambulances. Because with this question, I wanted to bring your attention to the fact that, yes, eventually AFSers realized, AFS volunteers decided that it doesn't really matter what uniform you have on when you're wounded. You're a patient, and you should have the same rights as every other patient. So it was the AFS volunteers who basically decided we will be bringing back from the battlefields wounded from both sides of the war effort. And you know, in a sense, you can think in the heat of war, this is a pretty novel idea, and I want you to think about it just for a second. Why would you want to be transporting your enemy and helping them? Yeah, I think it's a question that even, what is it now, 70 years after the Second World War, it's still very valid, because for a lot of people, when you are in the heat of the battle, you're only thinking about your own camp. Yeah? So coming back to that identity question, you think about your own group and you kind of forget about the other group. Now here we can see, for me, this is a wonderful example of AFS as a global citizenship organization, because they went beyond the national boundaries, which is also one of the answers that we've been seeing a lot in the discussion forums in terms of what is global citizenship, or what are some of the aspects of it. So yeah, this was one of the things that really caught my attention, and that's why I'm so proud of being one of the AFS volunteers, because early on they realized we have to forget about the enemy camps. We have to look at people from the human perspective, and that's how we can start talking to them. And what they realized when people, you know, when the patients go to the hospital and the uniforms were shed and they were in kind of a uniform of the patients, which was basically the same at the time, they realized that people are actually talking to each other, which of course they're not doing at the battlefield. At the battlefield, they're pretty busy killing themselves, right? But the moment the symbols of what they belong, what group they belong to, on what side of the war they're at, they start talking to each other. And this is when they came up with the idea of, well, not really came up, but this is when the idea got even stronger in their mind. And that's why they decided after the Second World War, we need to do something for the world peace. Yeah, and they decided to actually start exchanges on secondary school level, because they realized we need these enemies to start talking to each other. And the best place to do that is in a family, because that influences everybody around. So that's why after the Second World War in 1946, AFS basically got together, AFS volunteers got back together in the US again, and they decided to start a proper organization which would have as its main mission student exchanges on the secondary level between United States and the rest of the world. And in 1947, as we said, we saw the first exchanges actually take place. As far as I know, it was from 10 countries, and basically it was students coming to the US at the beginning. Yeah? The picture that you see up there is a picture from a US-German exchange that took place in 1952. Now, that was more or less 7 years after the war, but as you can imagine, Germany was considered to be the enemy for quite a while longer, since it was such a devastating war. So this was definitely something special that AFS did. So throughout the years, the exchanges take place. In 1970, what we see is kind of what I would call internationalization of the programs, because at that point, people in AFS decided, well, why do we only send to the US or from the US? Why don't we just make this worldwide? And this is when the boundaries really opened up, and the AFS programs from now on are taking place between any country, they don't have to necessarily end up in the United States. Yeah? So internationalization of AFS. And in 89, we can see 4 of the AFS organizations, national organizations, actually becoming full-fledged partners. And from 93, the partnership structure officially takes place, meaning that from 93, we talk about more or less, what is it now, 60 partner organizations, oops, sorry, not there yet, and lots and lots of volunteers. So this is basically, in a nutshell, a bit of a history of what the AFS, where the AFS comes from, and what are some of the ideas behind it. Rahel, do we have any, or are there any questions at this moment? I've been trying to do this rather quickly because, of course, history is an interesting topic, but not for all of us. I take it. There's a question about if we have organizations in Asia. Yes, there are definitely AFS organizations in Asia. Rahel, can you help me here? Who do we have there? We have definitely Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia. I mean,
there's
India,
also an AFS organization in China, Japan, so there's quite a lot of them, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, any more questions? All right, so I'll just put up the next slide, which basically tells us what is the mission, and I've been already talking about the mission for a while. So what is just important for us to know is that it's an international, volunteering, non-governmental, non-profit organization, so no money, we like to volunteer, that's the message, that provides intercultural learning opportunities, and we'll talk about that in a minute, to help people develop knowledge, skills, and understanding needed to create a more just and peaceful world. And basically that's, I think, what we're really in for when we're talking about AFS as a global organization. The main mission would be really creating more just and peaceful world, so we don't have to see more wars when the AFS kind of volunteers need to hop into an ambulance and do what they did at the beginning. Yeah, the mission still stands, and part of the vision then, as we said, providing intercultural learning. Learning opportunities. We're looking at and defining also global issues facing humanity. It's all about volunteers and volunteering. It's an educational organization that is also recognized as such. And what I find very important is that it's an organization that embraces change and critical thinking. And it really aims for innovative entrepreneurial solutions, not only within AFS, but also with other organizations. So in terms of the Red Cross, I'm sure there were already something happening there, but in the current history, there are a lot of projects when AFS also joins forces with other NGOs and other stakeholders in order to create the mission, which is really a world where we don't have to be worried about when does the next war starts. Sorry. Okay, so that was in a nutshell the mission and the vision. And what AFS is right now, so here's just a little statistic for you guys. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this one. But just to let you know, when we're talking about the global organization, being active in 103 countries, I think that's definitely a check. Yes, we are global. So the partner organizations are right now in 60 countries, on more or less all the continents except for Antarctica. It's too cold there still. With about 43,000 volunteers, and it is one of the largest volunteer international bodies that there is at the moment in terms of NGOs. As you can see, quite a good number of returnees. And last year we had 12,300 exchange programs. And as you can see by now, we're not just talking about secondary and high school students, but we're also talking about adult programs. So adult, mainly volunteering programs. All right. Just a little check back. In one sentence, we would like to ask you, again in the chat function, if you can write what you learned so far, or was there anything that caught your interest? Any other question you might have at this point? Let's take a minute.
All right, I see somebody raising a hand. No, not anymore. So you can write your answers. What have you learned so far, or questions you might have, right in the chat function. We have one more question actually for you, Jana. One is, what role are these volunteers playing? And if the volunteers are in the home country or abroad, That would be a first question. Then we have something that one participant has learned, which is the innovation side of the ambulances during World War I, which is very interesting to hear all about. There is a compliment for us, which is that we have nice voices. That's great too.
That's also doesn't it?
Also news was the collaboration between Ford and AFS.
Mm-hmm. To enlighten you a bit about that one, I mean, AFS came with more or less a specific, a specific request from Ford. They had to kind of adapt his vehicles, which supposedly, from one of the stories I heard, but it's not really confirmed, wasn't so easy at the beginning, because why would Ford do that when he was already busy creating cars that were being sold? But eventually they did come to certain agreements, and AFS purchased 1,000 ambulances from Ford, or the chassis, so the main part of the vehicles from Ford. But they purchased them for the full price. So we would have liked that cooperation to be probably at the time also more on the financial side, but yeah, the cooperation was definitely there. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll answer the question about the volunteers. So the question was whether, or what is the role of the volunteers? Well, given that AFS has about, given the large scope of operation of AFS globally, in a sense, we have 43,000 volunteers. There's less than 10,000 staff members, which basically means that in an average country, average size country, we're not talking about, let's say, United States or Germany or Thailand, which are huge, actually, organizations by now, where they send in thousands and they have several offices in the country. But for an average AFS organization, usually there will be one main office with, I don't know, between 10 and maybe 20 staff members who coordinate the work of the volunteers. So without the volunteers, there would be no exchanges, because it's the volunteers who actually do most of the work. So when we're talking about logistics, when students arrive in the new country, when we talk about orientations that the students receive as part of the exchange program, as part of the support that they receive, when we talk about anything else that has to do with these exchanges, it is all done by volunteers. The people in the office, or the staff members in the office, they only coordinate all that work. So without volunteers, there really truly wouldn't be 450,000 returnees that have had this wonderful life-changing experience. And in terms of, Rahel, what was the second part of the question? Whether volunteers are also located in other countries?
I'm sorry, just unmuting here. So the second part was if volunteering normally happens in their own countries, or if there's also volunteering abroad.
It works in both ways. I would say that the majority of it is that you volunteer in your own country and you support the operations of AFS on the ground in your area. However, you can also, what's been happening more and more now, and it's fantastic to see, is that in order to keep up the spirit, in order to keep up the motivation, the volunteers are also self-organizing and doing volunteer exchanges between different countries. Yeah, I can give you an example. I work with AFS Egypt now in a volunteer function. Before I was a staff member, and we've had already several volunteer exchanges where AFS Egypt volunteers would go and visit, for example, Germany or Norway or Sweden and a few other countries, and those volunteers at some point would come back to Egypt to see the reality on the ground here. Yeah. So this is something that's happening between volunteers, but you would still volunteer mainly in your own country. As for volunteering in different countries, that is also possible. I know that there is a staff actually exchange program where you can go and become a staff member of another AFS organization for 3 to 6 months in a different country. And also AFS has the volunteer exchange programs, but there you would mainly be a participant. This is as far as I know. Rahel, do you maybe have some other interesting news on
We have a couple more nice feedbacks from your side, dear participants. I think what was especially interesting to look at was the changemaker sides. So participants really liked thinking of the ambulance drivers as changemakers and as really seeing that altruistic spirit which is started right from the beginning of AFS. So that's probably something we can continue focusing on with the next couple of slides that we're going through, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I I see a question. I do have a doubt. I didn't get quite well in if the ambulances started to pick up wounded soldiers in World War I or World War II. I would say that the predominant narrative here would be that they already started in World War I. I have it confirmed that this happened during World War II. So whether this happened in World War I already, I cannot really say with a historical certainty. Yeah, but World War II definitely, both sides are being picked up. Okay. Oh, sorry, this has been already answered. Okay, so in a sense, let's then move on because we are having more about 10 more minutes. So yeah, so in terms of AFS, and when we're looking at the global citizenship matrix of that, and then we're looking at intercultural learning in action, because this is what AFS is basically doing. Just very quickly, we'll look at what are actually the intercultural encounters. Where do they take place? What is intercultural learning? And how does that really combine together with global citizenship? So, Rahel, I hope I'm going in the right direction here. And in terms of where the intercultural encounters take place, we have a little video that we would like to show you. Sorry, I'm having.
I'm just showing it. 1 second.
Oh, great, thank you.
It's coming. Full screen. Okay. Let's go with the video.
The English believe it's a slur on your host's food if you don't clear your plate. Whereas the Chinese feel you're questioning their generosity if you do. At HSBC, we never underestimate the importance of local knowledge, which is why we have local banks staffed by local people in over 80 countries across the globe. Okay. HSBC, the world's local bank.
So I apologize, probably the video was a bit disturbed. It wasn't as smooth as it should have been. So actually Rahel will post the link to this little kid video on our chat so that you can watch it in proper full speed. But this is, when we're talking about intercultural encounters, what people very often take from the word intercultural is that it happens between different nationalities. Yeah, and this is also what a lot of the AFS programs started with when the exchanges happened basically between different nationalities. So as we said at the beginning, it was mainly Germans, French, and other nationalities from Europe going to the US, and American students going to Europe, and then it became worldwide, and then it didn't have to be United States at all. But very often we started with talking about intercultural in terms of international, more or less, exchanges. One question for you, can the intercultural encounter also happen on a local level in your own country? Or can you give me other examples of intercultural encounters?
All right. If the first answer is a clear yes, you can also have intercultural encounters in your own country. Let's see if there are more answers coming in. Studying abroad on university level is another option. And obviously countries themselves are multicultural. Somebody is suggesting. Let's see what else. Exactly, that even in your neighborhood you can find people with different cultures. And I really like this example that we're getting in right now. It's just, you have to imagine when people who like rock music encounter people who like country music or folk music. So there's all kinds of encounters that can happen in your daily life as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you very much for those answers, because I just wanted to basically bring the debate down to the point where we're not really thinking only about what we call the big C's, so the big cultures, meaning nations, and the small C's, the small cultures. meaning kind of minorities and so on, but it is really an issue of everyday life by now. Yeah, and this has been also partially also reflected in some of the AFS programs. I know for a fact that in Germany you can actually go on exchange maybe from the north of Germany to the south of Germany. You don't have to leave the country anymore. Yeah, this basically just reflects the point that intercultural learning is really happening on a daily basis, and so I don't need to be having a discussion with an Egyptian being originally from Slovakia to have an intercultural encounter. Yeah. In the next slide that is on right now, I just when I was thinking of okay, how do we broach the topic of intercultural learning, and I'm sure there's already a lot of knowledge in there. So what I just did was create a little mind map combining some of the main elements that when we talk about intercultural learning that we always mention. Yeah, and the really important ones from our perspective when we talk about global citizenship and how does intercultural learning fit into that matrix in a sense, would be more or less talking about the attitudes and the skills and also the knowledge that we as global citizens, as AFSers are striving to have in order to actually really make a mark and really be interculturally sensitive and competent in that sense. Yeah, I'm afraid this graphic isn't that great. I will still share it with you in lower so that you can have a better look at it. It's really, really very simple. But in terms of the skills, what we're talking about mainly would be just summarizing empathy, self-reflection, and also reflection about the other, so awareness and reflection, suspending judgment, which is one of the big ones, decoding behaviors, communication, and into that we're also talking about interpersonal skills as well, and conflict management is very often part of the package as well, so negotiation, emotions, how does all that fit into that. In terms of attitudes, what we're striving for, and as you can you know probably best that it is really difficult to change somebody's attitude. It's possible, but it's difficult. It's about open-mindedness, it's about being mindful of what's happening around you and within you. It's about, again, awareness of the self and the other. And I think when you're, or I hope that when you think about who is a global citizen and what are the skills and the attitudes and the knowledge of a global citizen, all of these factors will definitely be of value, and you'll be seeing that as well. Another thing that I have here is, of course, local cultural knowledge, which means that once we actually travel to a different country or go to a different region in our own country or in the place where we're at the moment, people will have their own way how they interact with each other. And it's always good to know that. So besides having the different skills that you have as an interculturalist, as a global citizen, it is also important to learn more about how people do things locally. Yeah? And then you can go into the global perspective of that all. On the next slide, just to kind of look at it from a different perspective, and we're not going to go into that, but it's just some questions that I would like to pose for you. The first one is, very often when we talk about intercultural learning and competence, we talk about tolerance or respect. Which one should it be that we're actually dealing with at that moment? You know? And what's the difference there? Then also, one of the questions that people always get entangled in is, do we have culture or does culture have us? How do we stand on this culture versus personality phenomenon? What is it? Where are we there? And finally, and this question I was already answered in a sense, is does true intercultural learning happen only when we talk about countries, or does it actually happen when we talk about people in general? And I think the answer there is very clear. Okay, so I'm going to fast forward here and try to bring this back to the AFSers as interculturalists. And what do they basically stand for, or what has this 100-year-old tradition now of belonging to this particular group given to the people who actually interact with this organization? So first of all, AFSers seem to be multi-generational. So we're not only talking about secondary, or teenagers or high school students, we're also talking about young adults and adults in general who volunteer and who also staff the offices. We're also talking about host families, and we're also talking about eventually the whole community that is involved. So definitely several generations interacting for the same aim, which I think it's pretty impressive when you think about it. AFSers are transformative. They want to expand their horizons. They try to be open-minded. They try to learn about different countries, different languages. They try to have kind of leave their comfort zone, as we say, and really see what's out there. Yeah, which I don't have to probably explain how important that is for being a global citizen. And inclusiveness. Inclusiveness, which of course in terms of global citizenship, one of the big words that is running around these days is diversity and the need to be inclusive. How far are we inclusive in our personal lives is of course a question. AFS tries to be very inclusive in terms of the members of diverse communities, in terms of the number of women and men that work in the organization. So in order for us to be truly intercultural, we also need to be inclusive, and I think we can, I mean, when you look at the profiles of AFSers, I think that would be justified there. And I have a question for Rahel here. Rahel, remember the question we wanted to ask at this point?
Yes, I'm back here again. So we're moving on. Is it already our last question, Jana?
For the participant? I think so. Yeah.
Wonderful. So again, I think this will be an open question, if I'm correct. So you can actually already say it out loud, and I will tape it as you go. All right. So this is an open question. What is it that you would like to know, Jana?
Oh, the question goes back to me? Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, all right. So, when we're talking about how, being on an intercultural exchange with AFS, or actually, helping somebody or supporting somebody else during this this process, it's more or less a life-changing event. And I think many of you who have been on exchanges or worked with AFS would confirm that. So in that sense, when we were creating this webinar and thinking of all the links, we were thinking, how does the AFS really affect your personal life as well? Not just if you're volunteering for it or if you're on a program with it. And so we were thinking, when we look at certain careers that AFSers have after they basically leave AFS or after they come back from the exchange. What do you think? What are some of the, is there a likelihood that there will be a certain career path for them, or the experience has had no influence on them? Rahel, do you think this is a clear question?
Exactly. I took some time to write it down and break it down to one question. So we would like to ask you, do you think there's any type of AFS careers? Do you see that a lot of AFSers go into a certain career instead of another one? And we have already some first answers. Okay, so Thomas is saying that less now than in the past. Okay, that's an interesting point. Maybe you can specify that a little bit, Thomas.
You can maybe also give Thomas a voice if you would like to speak.
Yes, Thomas, you can also tell us in your own words if you're ready for that. In the meantime, I can tell you what Svenja is saying. A lot of AFSers are going for an international career. Exactly. I think that that makes a lot of sense. Is there any other? Oh, there's more coming now. Thomas cannot join us in voice, so we will have to see if we can maybe write a little bit more about his viewpoint. Nice. We have a very nice answer from Guto saying that you can be a change maker in any type of career, meaning that AFSers really can be all over the place. A lot of AFSers do volunteering, also abroad, international studies, and then we have, I really like this point of view that a lot of people are pointing out that AFSers, whatever they do, they bring a lot of openness and respect to their workplaces. So I think that's very great. And finally, we have the answer from Thomas as well, who says a lot of political science. So that's something that he has experienced, political careers. But it's now that the exchange has become more mainstream, you can find all kinds of people. I find that a very interesting answer. Great. And we're basically at the end of our webinar, right, Diana? So yeah. You already put on the questions or comments slide. That's great. So you feel free to ask us more questions. And we can also continue the discussion, of course, after the webinar on LoRa. Okay, people are still answering the question from before. That's great. Okay. It's a very interesting discussion. Do you have any questions regarding our webinar, dear participants? Okay, there's a very beautiful answer that we can basically start with, which is that that AFS is like a degree that you obtain, and it's not a degree in any kind of career direction, but it's more humanity and values and these kinds of things. So I think that's a very beautiful way of putting it, and also coming to the end of our webinar.
I totally agree with you, Rahel. This is a wonderful comment. I'll be probably stealing it for whoever posted it, so thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's kind of time to close. Thank you all for basically spending another extra 5 minutes with us than we announced. This is what it usually is. Just one more thing, and this is a note from the archives that we were asked to basically post this caption because, of course, there's certain copyright involved in terms of sharing images from the archive. But also, as you can see from this slide, some of the pictures' origins that are in the archives are unknown. So, if by any chance you recognize some of those pictures, do drop us a line and tell us where you saw them before, or if you know, maybe even who took them. Yeah, some pictures we know for a lot. It's a little bit of a mystery. So. This was just something that Nicole asked us to share with you. And I'll give word to Rahel, who will just tell you a bit about how this webinar connects with the webinar next week that she'll be actually hosting. So the floor is yours.
Exactly. So what we were trying to do today, and thank you, Jana, for doing such a great job, was bringing you up to speed with a bit of where we're coming from as AFSers. And I really like this idea of the degree. I'm still there, as you can see, the degree of humanity that people get when participating in AFS experiences. So we're going to move with that to the current situation. The topic of the next webinar will be It's Getting Better. And we're going to look at the current situation and what AFS and global citizenship education plays as a role in this current situation. And just to give you a little teaser, I put together these headlines, which you can see at the moment on the screen, which are from yesterday's newspapers. And I try to come up with a bit of different languages, so I hope you can read lots and different ones of them, because I know all of you probably speak lots and lots of languages. And with that, I'm looking forward to seeing you online again next week. And from my side, that's already the end. Thank you so much for your participation. It was great.
Thank you all very much, and we'll be sharing this presentation on more, just as well as some other resources that we mentioned. Thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Bye. See you next week.
Bye-bye.